Bend Around the Wind by Skylia. Chapter 87. Liberate! Part 2. The command center got hit. Natasha dived to the side to cover behind a wall when the windows shattered and some of the computers exploded. The energy blasts kept raining down on them, and soon the room was filled with smoke and dust as sparks flew everywhere. "We're going to get out of here," Cap said, crouching down next to her. Natasha nodded and looked around, searching for the best escape route. She tapped Steve on the shoulder and gestured at the relatively free path leading to one of the doors. "Okay, go. I'm right behind you," Steve said. She did not hesitate at all. She sucked in a breath to avoid inhaling smoke, pushed herself away from the wall, and started running. She was out in the corridor and away from the direct line of fire. Seconds later, Steve followed close behind. "Give me your status, everyone." Steve reached up to touch his communicator.
"They're heading towards the city,"
Janet replied. "I'm joining the troops to follow them," Bucky said. "Hank's gonna free the rest of them." "I'll be quick," Hank added. There were only a few barracks left. "Okay," Cap questioned. "The entrance is free. We are not direct targets," Clint replied. "That might change soon, though, considering how many of them we shot down already." "The docks are secure," Drongo said. "We already have human soldiers on some of these ships." That last one was not a surprise. Natasha dared any alien force to muzzle their way through the Hulk, especially with Drongo helping him. She still did not know enough about him to shape a full picture, but he was strong and level-headed. That was more than enough information about him at the moment. "Falcon, Wasp, what's going on with you?" Steve asked as they started making their way out of the building. "I'm under fire," Falcon replied. "Heavy fire. Oh crap, was it? Holy crap, these guys are not getting around."
"Yeah, I can see you,"
Janet said.
"and your butt definitely needs saving. Hold on, I'm on my way."
Don't worry, I'm good," Falcon said. He was breathing a little heavily, most likely from maneuvering too much. "Return to base if it looks that bad," Steve told them.
"We got it, Cap,"
Janet reassured him.
"Worry about something else."
They didn't go outside right away when they got to the entrance. They might not have been main targets, but there were still plenty of aliens up in the sky. "What now?" Natasha asked. "Stark, how does it look up there?" Steve asked, his hand on his ear, waiting for the reply. Natasha waited too, but the line remained silent. "Stark?" Steve called again. He shared half displeased, half worried look with Natasha. "Anyone can contact Stark?" Jarvis had full control over their line of communication, so it was possible that only some of them got cut off from him. Maybe Stark just did not feel like talking to them. "No, we cannot," Drongo said after a moment.
"Not a word from Hazard either,"
Juyu added.
"which I'm slightly more worried about."
Natasha just raised a questioning brow. Steve sighed. "For the time being, we have to trust them to do what's best," Steve said to everyone. "The base's personnel are freed now, so we are needed in the city." "Want us to go with you or remain here?" Drongo asked. "You two stay," Cap said. "The docks need to be protected." "Should we take the Quinjet?" Natasha asked. They needed to get out to the city quickly, and she would rather not run that far. "They would shoot us down immediately." Steve shook his head. A couple of military jeeps and trucks sped by the building, packed full with armed Marines. All of them were driving towards the main entrance while shooting at everything they could aim at up in the sky. One of them screeched to a halt, and Hank pushed his head out of the passenger side window. "Come on, jump in!" He waved at them. They moved at the same time, leaving the relative safety of the doorway to get to the jeep. Getting into the back seat was too bothersome, so they simply jumped up to the back next to the handful of soldiers standing there. The car was moving a second later, speeding towards the entrance, passing all the flaming wrecks of the flying chariots that had been shot down already. A couple of other vehicles joined them on their way out, coming from different parts of the base. By the time they drove through the main gates, there were dozens of them headed towards the city. Natasha caught sight of Clint jumping up into the back of a jeep to join them. That was the last time she caught sight of him for a long while. The one significant advantage they had compared to the last time they had to deal with an alien invasion was the backup. Sure, the police in New York did their best to get the civilians out of the way, but that was nothing compared to the well-organized hundreds of Marines that marched out to the city of San Diego. Steve was quick to take lead of the troops closest to him and give orders to other officers, who then led their own teams down the streets. Natasha left him behind to do what he did best. She had something more useful to do than fighting on the front lines. Loki's friend, Hatchet, the elf, was supposed to join the Fae. That was still something she had to get used to. They were obviously successful in destroying the energy field around the city, but there was no sight of them. It was best to make sure that the dome was down once and for all. They really did not need to be suddenly trapped inside here. But there was something else on Natasha's mind as well. According to Loki, the energy dome had a center down on the ground, right in the middle. That's where Hatchet was supposed to be, but there was no word from him since he left the base. He was one of the wild cards Natasha tried to keep a close attention on. Loki was someone she had to deal with before, so that was different. She had enough experience with how things worked in his head, or at least how his mind worked under specific circumstances. Also, she was fairly certain that she knew enough about the Skrull sisters and Drongo to have an accurate enough understanding of them. The elf, though, he was a bit more of a mystery. His loyalties were more than obvious, but not his nature. There was something profoundly similar to Loki in him, but he was undoubtedly less likely to be played by his emotions. He wore them all on his sleeve freely, almost shamelessly, instead of hiding them. Natasha always hated dealing with the likes of him. Hatchet was going to be angry, dangerously so, if he heard about Loki's capture. It was an undeniable fact. The question was, how dangerous exactly was he going to be? It was one thing to know for certain that a bomb was bound to explode, but not knowing how big the explosion would be? That was more than disconcerting. She knew how far Stark was willing to go, but she had no idea what the elf would do. She hated not knowing. She was only 2 blocks from where she left Cap and the Marines when she stumbled upon a group of the other soldiers. She tried to turn and hide from plain sight, but she was too late and one of them saw her. "That's not good," she remarked as they raised their weapons. She jumped to the side and hid behind a car, then she immediately drew her guns. There were only 6 of them. She could take them down even without help. She just needed a moment to formulate the best plan of action. The men started screaming and shouting then. They were also shooting at someone. Natasha carefully moved to glance out from her hideout. Oh, B. Not someone to waste such a perfect distraction. Natasha aimed and started shooting at the aliens. The Skrull girl still had her wings, but now both of her hands were morphed into axes. The sight was unexpected, but Natasha had no time to question it. S.H.I.E.L.D. would definitely give a lot to know how she had these abilities. Natasha herself was rather curious too. She knew the girl copied her appearance earlier. They had a few hours to kill while they flew here from New York, and Natasha wanted to know what exactly happened after Steve locked the tower with all of them inside. Clint was particularly pissed when he saw the footage of himself walking around the helicarrier. He had a lot of choice words about Loki. But whatever this girl did, it was more than what Loki was capable of. Another body hit the pavement, and Natasha reminded herself that this was not the time for gathering intelligence. She had bigger concerns. She shot the last soldier in the head and stood up when his body crumbled. B was covered in blood in places. The axes her arms ended in were dripping. She turned and looked at Natasha before tilting her head a little, as if she was listening to something. "Good hearing?" Natasha asked.
Better than yours,
She replied.
more coming. I'm supposed to stay with you.
"Really?
Stark said so.
Have you seen Hatchet?" Natasha asked. The girl looked at her again, then shook her head slowly. "With Loki captured, we cannot know what he might do." The red color of her eyes, combining with the unblinking stare, was enough to make Natasha tense a little. She knew enough about the girl to be able to tell how dangerous she was, after all.
I can't get close enough to the ship.
She said, then turning her head to stare at the other ship.
If you try that, you're dead,
Natasha said.
which is why I did not.
The girl replied.
But Loki must be freed.
We can't do anything about that at the moment, Natasha told her. Follow me if you want. We need to move. Natasha decided then. The center of the dome is where your friend Hatchet was headed to. It's the best place to start searching. I also need to make sure the dome stays down. She holstered her guns and started walking again with a brisk pace.
You're slow,
B said. I doubt a car would make me faster, Natasha answered, gesturing at all the abandoned cars, wrecks, and burning alien vehicles on the street. B looked at her for a moment again, sighing, then started changing. The armor stretched and shifted as her limbs grew and morphed, her green skin thickened, and the almost invisible scales hardened into something tough. Soon her hair was gone, and her skull started changing, jaw widening, teeth sharpening. Enormous claws appeared on her hands. No. Front feet. Natasha stood there, stunned, as the transformation swiftly took place. She saw Banner turning into the Hulk numerous times, but this was different. The girl changed completely. She was bigger, probably 6 feet long, and that not counting the thick tail swirling behind her. She was animal-like, a giant lizard. The red eyes were the same, though, locked on Natasha. It took a considerable amount of self-control to not react even a little when she started moving closer. "They're coming," rumbled Bee. It was difficult to associate this creature with the girl that was standing before her not that long ago. It was still the same girl, even if the words came out strange because of the long teeth in her mouth. Her voice was considerably deeper, too, and very hoarse. Natasha looked around and saw that some of the alien chariots were flying towards them. She pulled out her guns right away. "No," Bee growled. "Get on." "What?" She frowned. Bee gestured at her back with her large head. There were some impressive spikes and thick bones jutting out of her shoulders and nape just above the armor that was covering some of her torso, ideal to grab hold of. Oh, she had got to be kidding. But then again, Natasha didn't have any better ideas. She holstered her guns and swung one of her legs over the other's back. She tightened her legs when she was firmly in place, as if she were riding a horse bareback. Then she grabbed hold of a spike and the top of Bee's armor as tightly as she could. "This is definitely the strangest thing I've ever done," she said. "Don't fall off," Bee warned with a growl and took off, easily jumping over an overturned car as she turned and running down the street with incredible speed. Well, who needed cars when you had a shapeshifter with you? Bee was fast. They were already 2 blocks away when the other soldiers started shooting at them. Bee took a sharp turn to the left, turning down to a smaller street. The change in direction was too sudden for the chariots to follow, for now. Natasha pressed herself down some more, tightening her muscles to stay in place. Bee could change directions swiftly. She could jump over cars and other obstacles easily without losing much speed, but then of course the aliens caught up with them. Natasha first heard the sound of their vehicles right above them, and she shifted a little to be able to look up. "If you slow down, I can shoot at them," she yelled, but Bee shook her head and jumped. Her claws tore into the side of a building and she started running, climbing up the wall. It was getting really hard to stay on, but Natasha pressed her body completely to her back and managed to do it somehow. When they were up on the roof, Natasha turned around to face the aliens chasing them. Natasha took that as her cue to get off and pull her guns out. As soon as Natasha was on her own feet, Bee jumped and attacked their closest chariot, tearing into the alien driving it. The other 2 had to maneuver out of the way to avoid hitting them. Natasha aimed at the aliens rather than the chariots. Head, arms, legs, anything that was not protected by armor. When she hit one of them, the chariot he was driving wavered. The other one next to him tried to get it under control again, but that was when Bee leapt over from somewhere. Maybe she was still on the other chariot. Maybe she waited on the top of a different building. Natasha really did not see where she came from. Now she was on them, tearing them apart. Soon there was just a bloody mess around her because the aliens were pretty vulnerable against her teeth and claws. Bee jumped back to the roof Natasha was standing on when the chariot started falling. Blood was dripping from her claws and her teeth when she tilted her head again, the way she did before, listening. After a moment, she glanced back at Natasha and gestured at her back again. She made some noise, something like a growl or a grunt, but she said nothing. Maybe she had enough of speaking for now. Maybe she passed the point where she could speak much. Nonetheless, Natasha did not feel even a bit of trepidation as she swung her leg over her back again. They were allies right now. She could trust this fact. Bee may have turned her body into that of a beast's, but she was not truly one. She knew which side she fought on. That was all Natasha needed to know. A couple of blocks later, they heard people screaming. It was not screams of agony, but the sound of a panicking crowd, a mass of bodies scared and running away from something. "Cap, something big is going on here," she reported back right away when Bee stopped and Natasha could get off from her back. She immediately started shifting back into her usual shape. Only her shoes did not survive the change. Her armor and the dark stretchy material underneath it easily took on their previous form. This had to be Stark's design. He made the armor with shape-shifting in mind. It was clever, Natasha had to admit that. "Where are you?" Steve asked in return. Natasha glanced around. 8th Avenue, she said, close to the center of the dome. "Be careful," Steve said, not even trying to warn her off from checking it out. Falcon and Wasp can be there almost immediately if you need them.
I have enough backup,
she said, glancing at Bee.
but understood.
She looked at Bee again. Let's see what's happening. Bee followed with a nod. Most of the people were running away from the center of the dome. None of them looked overly injured, mostly just scared. Some startled when they caught sight of them, or probably just Bee, but they did not stop, just kept running away down into underground parking lots and into buildings. At least they were smart enough to get out of the way. When they finally turned one last corner, it became quite obvious why everyone was running away. There were more flying chariots up in the air here than anywhere else in the city, all circling above something about a block away. Whatever it was on the ground below them, it was bright, and there was most definitely a fight going on around it. But that was not what made Natasha stop so abruptly that Bee almost ran into her. That was the rats. Hundreds or thousands of rats swarming on the street. They were scurrying across the street, hanging off from ledges and the awnings above the show windows. At second glance, Natasha realized they were not the only animals around. They were just the most noticeable. There were stray cats perching on top of some cars and toads hopping around, coming up from the sewers. Not to mention all the birds, small and big, everything from sparrows to pigeons and seagulls. "What the hell?" she breathed out. "There." Bee raised a hand to point at something in the distance. The flying chariots were obviously shooting at a specific target now. "Okay, we should find a less crowded street," Natasha said. She had nothing against rats, but she doubted even she could get past all of them without losing at least some meat from her bones.
They're not here to fight us,
Bee said and started going forward again. Natasha had doubts, but then the rodents parted like the Red Sea as Bee got close to them, giving her plenty of space to cross. "Well then."
There's a big fight at the center of the dome, Natasha said into her comlink to inform everyone. Maybe they're trying to put the barrier back up.
"We've got things under control here," Bucky said right away, "so I'm on my way to you." "I can swing by too," Falcon added.
I'm already close enough to see what the heck is that on the streets,
Janet asked.
Rats, toads, the like,
Natasha said. "It must be the Fae's doing," Drongo told them.
Any sign of Hatchet?
Juyo asked.
Not yet, but he's got to be here somewhere,
Natasha said. "Keep us posted," Steve told her. "If you need more help, we can get there pretty quickly." There were not just animals around. The bright spot down on the ground had to be part of what created the dome, because there were all sorts of shapes around it. Tall and short, big and small. Natasha was too far away to see them properly. The flying chariots were attacking them, though.
I don't think the dome is destroyed, Natasha said. I think the Fae are just keeping it down, but they're under attack.
"Everyone who's able to get there, go immediately," Steve ordered right away. "We can't get locked in the city." "I would go if I could," Clint said, "but I'm pretty busy right now." "I have my hands full too," Hank said. Bee already moved, sprouted some wings again in a matter of seconds, while one of her hands shifted into a sharp blade. Then off she was. Natasha approached more carefully, keeping close to the buildings but her gun raised and ready for use. The Fae all looked different. Some had wings, some were green or black or even white as lime. A few of them were dripping wet, while others seemed to be covered in dust and mud. Over half dozen of them stood around the bright machine. They encircled it. Probably that's how they kept it from working. Whatever that thing was, it had to be destroyed. This was obviously just a temporary solution, especially considering that the majority of the others' soldiers seemed to focus on them. A bright flash of light forced Natasha to turn her head away. Then almost immediately she had to move into a small alley, when at least a dozen chariots plummeted to the ground at once. Half of them were on fire. The other half were just smoking and spitting sparks everywhere. One of them exploded as it hit a car, but it was far enough that Natasha only felt some of the wave of heat that erupted. A moment later, a hydrant close to it exploded out of nowhere, blasting water everywhere, putting out the flames. Then a second hydrant exploded too, a little closer to Natasha, and more water started pouring down the road. She watched as more and more hydrants popped down on the street, spraying water in every direction.
What is happening there?
Janet asked. I have no idea, Natasha answered. She ventured out from her hideout, trying to get closer. The water was not just coming from the hydrants, it was bubbling up from the drains too. Natasha was already ankle deep in water on the sidewalk.
She spotted Hatchet finally. He was standing on top of a burnt-out car, shooting at the chariots from 2 guns. They did considerably more damage than Natasha's guns did. Her guns, unfortunately, only had bullets in them. Hatchet was obviously protecting the Fae who stood in the circle, making sure nobody got close to them. One chariot approached him with rapid speed, not just shooting at him from afar. Hatchet holstered his guns and leapt from the car, jumping higher than any human could have been able to. He grabbed hold of the vehicle and swung his body inside of it. One alien got kicked off of it, then a second one hit a nearby building. Hatchet took control of the chariot and turned it around. He flew with it for a few seconds, then jumped back out of it. The uncontrolled chariot flew right into the midst of the other ones, knocking a few out from the air. The elf looked pissed now that Natasha could take a closer look at him. Beyond pissed. He did not pull his guns again. His hands simply started burning with a bright violet color, and he sent powerful blasts at the enemies in front of him. The flash of light was incredibly dazzling, and Natasha realized that it was Hatchet's magic she saw earlier. It was good to know that she did not underestimate him. The way he fought so ruthlessly and obviously uncaring about the destruction around him told Natasha enough. She hoped he would not start doing more harm than good. Natasha approached the fight, not as carefully as before. The elf swirled around almost immediately, one eye bright violet, almost glowing, while the other was dark, with his pupil blown wide. His hair was a mess, and he had plenty of blood on him. There was a certain look on his face, an almost wild glint in his eyes, and the way he held himself, he startlingly reminded her of Loki again, the version of Loki she least wanted to be face-to-face with. "Can we make sure the dome stays down?" she asked instead of commenting on anything that was surrounding her. "We cannot, but we know someone who can, and he's on his way," Hatchet said. He turned away from Natasha and eyed the other soldiers again. Natasha was suddenly not sure the elf knew about Loki's capture. She doubted he would be here, fighting these soldiers if he did. "Who?" Natasha asked. "Someone who is not at all pleased about all this," Hatchet said, almost hissing angrily. "It is an elder, someone who's been guarding over this area for a very long time. We only need to keep the barrier down until he arrives." "Okay, some big bad Fae backup," Natasha nodded. "Any idea when he gets here?" Hatchet looked around at the water flowing down the streets and smiled sharply. "Soon," he said, and started running back into the fight, his hands glowing already. The water just kept coming from everywhere. What was pouring out from the hydrants was almost nothing compared to what was coming up from the sewers. Natasha soon realized that she would be washed off her feet if she did not find somewhere safer to be. She ran back into the alley she took cover in before. It took but a moment to spot a fire escape. She hopped up on top of a garage container, then jumped over to the ladder, climbing up quickly. The building was luckily only 4 stories high, so it did not take her that long to reach the roof. She pulled her guns immediately and shot down an alien who hovered above the building in a chariot. His body dropped like a sack of flour. It was always reassuring when bullets were actually capable of harming something. She walked over to the edge of the roof and watched how more and more water appeared on the streets. It was like a river was taking it over. The abandoned cars started moving, dragged away by the heavy backwash. Wasp landed next to her with a soft thud, then a moment later, Bee, then Falcon. Wasp and Falcon kept shooting at the chariots in the distance, but they kept half of their attention on the street below. "Is this outside the Fae?" Janet asked. "What the heck are they trying to do? Flush the aliens out of the city?" Falcon asked a little incredulously. "There are people down in parking lots and stuff. They're going to drown." Natasha frowned at the tumbling water. "It's not just the water," she said then. There was something not right with the way it flowed. It did not fill up everything. It stayed mostly on the main street, as if something was keeping it from flooding everything. Her suspicions were confirmed when the water flow simply stopped. It ceased to move completely. Froze. Then it started streaming in the opposite direction, completely defying any laws of physics. "I don't think I like this," Janet said. At one particular spot, not that far away from the circle of Fae, the water started glowing. First, it was just a little lump, but it was soon rising higher and higher. All water in the streets was flowing towards it, increasing its size. "So, are we worrying about this?" Falcon asked. First, it was like a large pillar of water, then it started to thicken and take on a shape. It was growing bigger than some of the nearby buildings, and soon it was tall enough to be on the same level as them.
Its shape was nothing overly solid, but there were definitely limbs there, at least 4 appendages, tentacle-like outgrowths of water. Then there was a head and a face. It shifted constantly because it was made of water, but it was still a face.
I think they were waiting for him,
B said. The creature roared. How it made a sound, Natasha did not know because it looked like a giant body of water, but it did roar in a deep but sharp sound. It was almost like a whale's moan. Then it charged. The long limbs lashed out towards the flying chariots, swatting them down like flies, drowning the aliens that got trapped in its enormous body. Natasha may have been staring a little, and she might have been feeling a little shock at the sight of the 40 feet tall water creature.
That thing has been living it all this time? Morgan asked. Holy crap.
Natasha reached up to touch her communicator.
Heads up, everyone. The giant water monster on the Broadway is here to help us.
There was a moment of silence from everyone. Then Clint cleared his throat. Oh, That's good to know, he said. But look at the sky, south from the Balboa Stadium, north from the Broadway. They all turned around immediately, searching the sky for whatever Clint spotted. There were dark clouds gathering at one specific spot, too quickly for it to be natural. A familiar sight.
What is that?
B asked.
Natasha felt her lips curl up into a smirk.
Bifrost,
she said.